I like, when I'm writing a story, I like to do as much as I can to describe a place where an event happens as effectively as I can. So I come to the place. So here I am. I'm in Arnhem. I'm by the bridge. I've been to the museum, so I've looked in the museum, and I understand more about the battle because I've been to the museum. So I understand the place more in the context, and also the museum. But also, one thing that's really important to me when I'm writing stories about real people who've been through things is not to make it up, but to base it on the testimony of the people who lived in this area. And this in Arnhem, there was a girl called Audrey van Maanen, and she wrote a diary as that battle was happening. And this diary has been really important to me, as well as other books, in helping me to describe in my story what it might have been like here in Arnhem in September 1944. I do also read other accounts by other children, particularly children, because she was a girl when she wrote this. She was in her early teens, and I've read other books. This is a book by a man who was a boy when the Germans occupied the Netherlands, and also an even more famous book in that ilk, Anne Frank's diary, the Diaries of Anne Frank, the diary of a young girl. And I read all these stories. Obviously they have very different experiences to my character in the book, but some of the things they go through and see and explain in their stories helped me to write Edda's story. And particularly, obviously, like Anne Frank's diary, she had a very different experience in lots of ways to Edda, or to Audrey Hepburn. But there are some things that I could draw from this book which were really helpful. But in particular, Audrey van Maanen's diary, like 78 years ago in 1944 here in September, she lived in a battlefield. They were hiding in the cellars, houses were being blown up, there was war raging through her town, and it must have been utterly terrifying, and you can tell how terrifying it is from what she writes in here. And I just wanted to read you a bit from the book, which is kind of drawn from her diaries and set not in Arnhem, but this is about refugees who had to leave Arnhem while the battles were taking place and had to escape to Velp, which is where Edda in the story, Audrey Hepburn, was living. And this is kind of based on what she said, and there's something she says in here that really struck with me about when she saw dead bodies of soldiers and civilians in the street, the effect that had on her. And I wanted to put that in my book, so I made Angie a character in the story, although she, as far as we know, she never met Edda, Audrey Hepburn. I wanted to put her in as a character to try and make it as authentic as possible. So I'll just read you this bit, and I really like, when I've written a story, to read what I've written in situ, in the place where it happens. So this is Edda has left Arnhem and gone to Velp. Sorry, Angie has left Arnhem and gone to Velp, where Edda, her old friend, is still living. Miserable was the right word, Edda thought, watching the streams of people straggling their way through Velp as a light rain fell on the village. Mum was standing next to her now, watching women, children, old men. Some were wearing multiple layers, as if they had tried to put on all their clothes at once. Others carried white flags pinned to their jackets as they lugged bags or pulled handcarts behind them. A few had dogs, others sheep and goats. Babies were crying, adults were crying. Young and old, each of them looked filthy and shattered. The Germans are emptying Arnhem, Mum told Edda. We must do what we can to help these people. It was a desperate sight for Edda to take in, but it was not the chaotic look of these people that upset her the most. It was the expression on their faces, their eyes wide and staring at the world around them in confusion. But why, Edda asked, why can't they stay in Arnhem? The battle's over now. I can only imagine it's so the Germans can root out any Allied paratroopers, Mum replied, glancing at one man among the refugees who was wearing a scarf over his head and limping severely as if he had suffered an injury. Like him, Mum whispered, I suspect. What will we do with him? Edda asked. The same as with the others, we can help, Mum said. Give him a blanket, some food. He's welcome here. We'll shelter as many as we can. Mum walked towards the mass of people and ushered some of them towards the house. Edda watched, feeling helpless, as 30 or more refugees came into their garden. One group looked particularly shabby, pulling a pram loaded with their possessions behind them. a dog trotting along beside a woman and 3 children. They looked pathetic and dirty, Edda thought. She felt herself recoil, although she tried not to show it. Then she saw that the dog, a small black and white thing, was wagging its tail at her, as if it knew her. Roos! It was Roos, Angie's dog from Arnhem, and after a few moments, Edda could not work out why Roos was with this group of bedraggled refugees, until she looked properly at the person holding the dog's lead. Angie. It was Angie, her friend, with her sisters and mother. Edda gasped, then ran to Angie, ashamed she had not recognised her immediately. That night, the population of Velp increased 30 times over. The people of the village took in as many refugees as they could. Houses were full. Churches were full. The public buildings that the Germans had not taken over were full. Locals shared any food and medical supplies they had with the refugees. There were nearly 40 people staying at Edda's, including Angie and her sisters and her mother. Some lodged in the house, others in the cellar. Many camped out in the garden under tarpaulins Oppa had found in his shed. The garden now looked like a camping ground with small fires burning as people cooked food that local farmers brought into the village for them. Angie seemed broken. She told Edda that when she saw the paratroopers dropping in, and when they initially took control and drove the Germans out, she had expected liberation, freedom, a world back to normal where she could enjoy her life again. Now she had lost everything, her toys, her clothes, her home. We hid in the cellar, she said, and a shell came down on the house. We thought we would be buried alive. The ceiling collapsed. Look at me, I'm covered in dust. Then earlier today we were made to leave. The Germans forced us to move at gunpoint. Edda stroked her friend's hair, picking pieces of dust and plaster out of it. I saw bodies, Angie confessed after a long time. Bodies? Edda asked. Dead bodies. There was one in the street outside my house, Angie said. It was cold and stiff, and it was covered in dust and dirt, and I couldn't help thinking that it could be me, that I'd be lying in the street one day like that we all would. And that for me was such a powerful piece of writing from Angie van Maanen's, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, I'm probably not, diary, that I really wanted to include it in the book. So I thought I brought Audrey Hepburn and Angie van Maanen together for that scene. And Angie features in other parts in the book. And that I suppose what I'm trying to say is, to write a story like this, for me, to try and get my facts right, what I do is I come to the place, I go to the museums, and I read the testimony of those who have been involved, just to try as hard as I can to make it authentic. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I'll leave you a view of the bridge too far.